So to summarize, when we say that Jesus is going to reward every man according to his works when he assumes his throne in glory, which happened at the ascension, we're saying that at that point in history is when Jesus definitively took his place on the right hand of God the Father, and then the souls go unto him, those that are made perfect and righteous. They are reserved for their eternal inheritance that was prepared for them before the foundation of the world. But they still wait for the redemption of their body. But they still, like Paul and others, they said once they left that body, they were going to go up to the head, Jesus Christ. And the souls of the reprobate, well, they go to torments in hell. And they await the second death, eternal damnation. Now, there's a problem here that's usually brought up. How is it that if Jesus, when he looks over to the thief on the cross, and he says that today you will be with me in paradise, if this is the reward of him being made perfect and righteous, and that happened before Christ ascended, because of course Jesus went into the ground, was buried, and then he rose again, and then 40 days after is when he ascended, how is it that Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise? And how is it that Ecclesiastes says that the Spirit returns to God who gave it long before Jesus definitively did ascend in history? Well, there's certain presumptions that we get when we, without taking into the biblical realist position when we talk about eternity and when we talk about heaven. Because outside of this temporal plane, if you will, there is no time. This is presumed in Christianity. For example, when we talk about Jesus being eternally begotten, we're talking about biblical realism. We're not talking so much from the Platonic view or idealism. We're not talking about preterist idealism here. But we're talking about when Jesus ascends to his throne, it's not like they're waiting in time. Or at least when we talk about the cognitive, rational faculties that allow us to perceive time temporally, we're talking about in heaven, there is definite action and sequence and logical order to events. Jesus assuming his throne and putting all enemies under him. But the realization of this only takes time here on earth. And so we can say that death is defeated and all that, and that Jesus applies his redemption to his elect throughout history, even though it's already accomplished at the cross. This is assumed in Christianity. And so when we say that the souls are waiting the redemption of their body, we're not talking about they're sitting looking at their watch. But there's a definite order to these events, but it doesn't necessarily correspond or run parallel to time in indefinite history. Well, let's look at some passages here. Let's look at Matthew chapter 25, because I think we can make a practical application here. In 31, when the Son of Man shall come into his glory, and all the angels with him, then he shall sit upon the throne of his glory. Did this happen at AD 70? Is this the coming in judgment against Jerusalem, or is this a recapitulation? Is this something that happens in heaven, and that corresponds with him coming into his kingdom in Matthew chapter 16, verses 27 and 28, which we just read about? It seems to be the same parallel. The Ancient of Days assuming his throne of glory, him coming into the glory of his Father with his angels. This is something that happened at the Ascension, not AD 70, when we talk about how it is realized in history. Now, in verse 32, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. Now, we could see this probably is a type of, for example, the Day of Atonement. But we don't have to get too deep into that to really see what the text itself is saying here. And it says, and he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. So when we talk about after death, immediately we go to what? Another plane, if you will. That is, my physical body returns to corruption, it returns to dust, but my soul leaves a temporal, finite plane where Jesus has already been in that position of glory and I'm raised up to him. So it doesn't matter if I was in history, before the cross or long after, I'm already rewarded being made perfect in Him. I'm declared righteous, so I'm rewarded for that. And I'm rewarded also to my deeds that I do here on earth. And we see that as a prevalent theme throughout the Bible. This isn't talking about justification, but a servant is rewarded according to his works, what he's done, a service, a profitable servant for the Lord. Because our bodies are declared temples for the Lord, and they're declared servants of obedience, but also servants for the Lord. Our bodies are for the Lord, and we should use them as instruments for the Lord, and not as servants unto sin. So there's definitely practical applications for the Christian life when we see the judgment here. And then shall the king say unto him on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom, prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So I'm already separated on the right hand. And that's where I'm rewarded for my works. But there's still a final definitive judgment that I will go before the throne of Christ, and I will actually receive the end of the promise. Not that I wasn't already made perfect, because Paul said that once he died, he would go to be with Christ as Lord. But there is still a coming and a redemption of the body too. We're not talking about a corporate body of the body of Christ that was raised in AD 70, because the body of Christ was already made alive and won at the cross when we talk about how it works in history. But we're not talking about finite time anymore. We're talking about I'm going in heaven. And that's where realism applies. These events are very real in the mind of God. And it's not like He's waiting for them to happen, but they are ever present before Him, and they're ever real before the mind of God, because God is eternal, unchanging. So when we continue on reading, it says that then those who shall say unto him also, those on the left hand, Jesus says, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Well, He's already separated him, and that's where He's already rewarded them according to their works. But they still, according to the Westminster Confession of Faith, and even according to Matthew chapter 25, they were still reserved for an impending judgment. And that's when Christ said thereafter that they are to go from Him, because they're cursed, and that's where they go into everlasting damnation. And we see that. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into everlasting life. Now when they were already separated, one on the left and one on the right, the righteous on the right, the reprobate on the left, that was when Jesus rewarded every man according to their works. Some were made perfect, and some, they were destined to destruction. But they still were waiting for something to come. And that is where biblical realism plays in. That's where preterism answers questions that full preterists can't really talk about. This is all one event to them that happened locally, temporally in AD 70. But we're talking about the application of redemption, something that was secured at the cross, something that was acquisited at the cross. And how is it applied in history? Well, it's applied through Christ being an everlasting mediator in heaven for us.